Welcome to PalacioMagazine.com. We're laughing because we've had some technical issues. Hi, Jerlene. How are you?
I'm doing well for a Friday. Doing well in a COVID land.
Yes. We're all. How are you doing with that, by the way? Because you have children.
You know, I just keep reminding myself that this is new for everyone. This is new for everyone. So the rules are being made up as we go along, and it's okay not knowing.
Yeah.
It's okay not knowing. So I'm not getting upset about the new new world order. I am questioning it. But I'm not getting upset about it.
Yeah, I mean, you only have so much control as we pretty much here come to the understanding that, the only thing we really have control over is our actions, protecting ourselves, protecting our family. And as I like to tell people, if you don't want to wear a mask, that's your decision, but just stay the hell away from me.
For me, right.
So I often ask guests to use a word or sentence to describe themselves. But I want to try something a little different today with you. What word or sentence would people who know you use to describe you?
Passionate.
Okay. Would you like to elaborate on that?
Whatever it is that I believe in or whatever it is that I want, I'm passionate about it.
Okay.
It's deep.
In terms of like your personal, professional, community, or all three?
All three. They know I'm gonna die on that sword.
All right. So now, are those is that word any different than what you would use to describe yourself? Or are there other words that you would use to describe yourself?
I would use the same. Although I think sometimes it could be a negative.
Because?
Because I will die on that sword. If I believe in something, I will head first.
Yeah,
there goes Jerlene.
Don't die, because we need passionate people like yourself. I was reading all the different configurations of your bio and resume, and that you sent me, and I found a common theme or skill, and that is organization. Mm-hmm. You're an organizer. You help people organize, whether it's their business, nonprofit, and would that be safe to say that that's probably your overriding skill?
Yes, I see it as connecting the dots. How are things connected? And yes, it's something that I carry out of. I carried out of corporate. I carried into nonprofit. I carried into the community. So whether it's physically organizing a stack of papers, or if it's trying to coordinate people to speak at an action, to me, it's all the same. It's all the same.
Give me an idea of how you use that skill, let's say, in your professional life as an entrepreneur, a small business owner.
Oh, as an entrepreneur, well, one thing that I do is one thing that I've learned and I'm guilty of this myself, when we have, say, a stack of papers on our desk, and maybe it's bills, maybe it's receipts, maybe it's some correspondence that need to be filed, it tends to be overwhelming to sort through it. So I can go into an environment that I don't even know what's in that stack, and I can sort through it, and I can separate it, and I can properly file and collate it. And it's easy for me when it's somebody else's pile of stuff.
Oh, we have a little confession here?
Yes. So I actually have someone that comes and does it for me.
Oh.
That's actually a part of my team that goes with me to different sites. But I have someone that does it for me because I'm overwhelmed with it. But I realize it so I support small businesses and nonprofits, because those piles, they grow.
You know, I was a small business consultant with the Los Angeles Regional Small Business Development Center for about 5 years. And I will tell you that that is probably the biggest problem facing small business owners, is organization. They all have great ideas. They have the enthusiasm, the passion, the commitment, but they're very easily distracted, derailed. And what derails them is they just, because, and you know this better probably than most people, you start out as one person, the sole entrepreneur, and then you get to a point when, you got to hand off to people. You have to get help. And a lot of people refuse to get help. They just think that they can do this. I'm going to open up that restaurant by myself, run it by myself, or a storefront, or even a consulting business.
Mm-hmm.
Is that been the experience that people just?
Yes. A lot of it happens a lot in nonprofit.
Yes.
Where there's someone that they're visionary. They have this wonderful vision, and they may even have the capacity to deliver a program, but there's also that back office. There's papers that need to be filed, whether it's, actually filing it for storage, or filing it to keep your organization moving forward, or filing it so that you have records so you could write a grant. And I think it's a skill, it's a gift, and not everybody can do it. And there's also, I think, a nonprofit that I've experienced, there's a low priority there to do it. And I always tell my clients, when you go to the bank, your money's in the bank, right? You give them your name and they give you your money. Well, what if that data was wrong and your money was in somebody else's account?
Oh, I'd be mad.
Right. So I'm like, so you got to think about your office the same type of way. You have data and information that needs to be organized properly so that you can get to it quickly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that's a lot of businesses and organizations, like, maybe they forgot to pay that business license.
Oh yeah. Oh my gosh.
The bottom of the pile.
Well, even something as simple as, and I've seen this, particularly with small businesses, you say to them, well, have you filed for an LLC or your business license? And they look at you like clueless. I said, well, you really need, and we would point them to all the different resources in LA County, like, okay, well, maybe you can get away with, you don't need an LLC. That's something you should speak to your tax person with. But if you're going to do business, you might want to get a business license. And they look at you like, wait a second, I need a business license to whatever it is. I mean, sometimes it's not like they're selling something out of a storefront, but they're doing online, for instance, okay? Well, the laws are different in different parts of the country, but you really should look into that. And they just don't know how to do that. So organization is like just making that checklist of things that you have to do. When it comes to your work as a community advocate, and we're going to get a little bit more into that work down the line, how does that skill, that organization skill, help you as a community advocate?
I actually come into it's something that's helpful, but it's also something that makes me brings me a lot of anxiety, because I go into things thinking about that back office, so while someone's talking about all these wonderful things that we want to do in the community, I'm thinking, well, how is this sustainable? Mm-hmm. Is everything decent and in order? There's organizations that maybe they didn't file their proper paperwork, so their nonprofit status is at jeopardy. Well, you can't get funds if your status isn't decent and in order, then you can't do the work. So unfortunately, when I go into things, I'm all over the place in my mind. Like I'm about the mission, I'm about the goal, but I'm thinking, well, is everything taken care of? You know, so I always bring that with me. But what I've learned to do is use it. You know, I mean, I used to do the neighborhood cleanups. You know, every Saturday I was out there putting a broom and picking up trash. And somewhere along the line, I'm like, wait a minute, I have other skills that I can offer as a volunteer. So I began to use the skills that I had in corporate. Like, how can you need a letter written? Oh, I could do that. So instead of out there pushing a broom or whatever the physical activity was, I was sitting behind a computer writing a letter on their behalf or something like that. So.
Yeah, I'm going to get a little bit more into your community advocacy work after this break that we're coming up on. But I just find this has been my experience. Well, I go way back in terms of community organizing, and I always tell people one of the very, very first things that I learned, this is going back to the 60s, is you can have a cause, you can have a group of people following you, but if you're going to lead, you have got to be organized. You've got to, like you said, like this checklist of things that have to be done. It's really no different than what if you're a small business owner. You know, if you don't have all your, you know, did you check and see if you need a permit for that demonstration you want to do? I mean, you don't need it, but you know, you live in certain cities, they will demand it. Or, you know, did you contact everybody that you want at that demonstration? You know, I mean, back then we didn't have the internet, we didn't have you know, cell phones, and you know, we didn't have text messages, and so you literally had to get on the landline, remember those, landline, and like do a whole telephone tree and call people and make sure that they're going to show up to the protest or to the board meeting, the school board meeting. So yeah, it was always this kind of interesting thing that there were these people that I learned from who were just like, they could just sit down, write down a list, and then parse it out. Okay, you take care of this, you take care of that. That is a skill. That is a skill. All right, let's take a break. When we come back, I want to talk about a lot of your you know, recent advocacy for one, government accountability, your particularly some of your recent stuff with LBUSD, and also with, well, let's talk about violence in the city and some of the efforts, one way or the other, and also social justice. All right, so when we come back, we're going to continue our conversation with Jerlene Tatum, a self-described mom, entrepreneur, small business owner, community advocate. I'm Antonio Ruiz, and this is Palacio Magazine. Welcome back to PalacioMagazine.com. I'm Antonio Ruiz, and my guest is Jerlene Tatum, as I described her earlier, mom, entrepreneur, small business owner, community advocate, and this is an organized person, which all of us can be a little more organized. So I was looking at your Facebook page, and you know, you've been very vocal.
Yes.
You've been doing live chats. And one of the issues is, of course, LBUSD. And so you recently posted a question that I think you're being sarcastic about. Is the Long Beach Unified School District really about equity? And that had to do with the recent vote to appoint the president of the board, which I found kind of interesting. Why don't you describe what happened at that board meeting? Because you called into that board meeting.
Wow. It was time for reorg, right, which is interesting because the reorg, there's going to be new board members by the end of this school year. Right. So only 3 of the current 5 are eligible to be part of that reorganization, which they go through every year. And traditionally, the vice president of the board is elected by their peers as president. And that has kind of been what has been taking place of, I know at least for the last 10 years, someone said 20, but at least for the last 10 years, that has been the process. So prior to the board meeting, there was a lot of discussion in the community about who's going to be the next president. And everyone's saying, well, it's supposed to be Dr. Benitez. If you're following what has already taken place, it's going to be Dr. Benitez. But Dr. Benitez has been outspoken. He was outspoken in the selection process of the superintendent. He was outspoken in the salary increase that was given to Jill Baker. He's been very outspoken in board policy in making sure that it actually reflects students. And oftentimes, my observation, he's ignored. He'll say something and his other colleagues will not even acknowledge that he said anything. They'll just go on to the next topic. And it's kind of Twilight Zone-ish, So I don't want to say that I wasn't surprised that he didn't get the presidency, yet I was still surprised that he didn't get the presidency. So basically what happened...
I'm sorry, but all at the same time when they're talking about equity.
Yes. So that night they had an equity policy on the agenda. And this equity policy, I actually have it in front of me. It was talking about just making sure that there was this long description given by the incoming superintendent about making sure the decisions were going to be made through an equity lens and taking in consideration of, racial and ethnic background and the data. And then the current board chair, Dr. Williams, he said, since I've been board president, race and equity has mattered to me, to something to that. That's how he kind of began.
I read the quote, yes.
Yeah. And then board member Kerr puts out a nomination for Dr. Benitez as president, and it's silence. And then the next thing you know, a nomination is made for Craighead. And then a second, and then someone begins to talk about, well, it's appropriate and best because of her longevity on the school board. Well, when Craighead was selected to serve on the school board, because she wasn't originally elected, she was selected
right.
Due to a vacancy. She served as president after being on that board for less than 2 years. So all of a sudden, longevity matters. So for those of us in the community that were watching, we felt like that was a violation of trust, that it was not, again, and then I was I didn't hold my tongue when I said, okay, so now you have 2 white women at the helm of the board and a white woman at the helm of the school district. After you've just talked about all this equity, that's not equity.
I'm not going to question the motives of people that I don't know, but let's just say that this doesn't look good. In Long Beach, I've lived here now since 1994, and I'm always puzzled by how can you live in a city that is majority people of color, with a very large percentage of that being Latino. There was, before Juan Benitez, there was one other Latina, or Latinx, board member. That was back in the 90s. So I just think that, again, I'm not questioning people's motives here, but you cannot speak about equity in a board meeting and then obviously, come on. It's obvious what's going on here. You don't want someone who is outspoken to be board president. You don't want someone who's rocking the boat. Why are you so interested in education? How do you view the overall issue, the need for education reform in the city?
Oh, I have children. But even before I had children, the public school system worked for me. It worked for me. I went through Long Beach Unified Schools, and it wasn't easy. It was a lot of challenges, but there were individual educators that took a hold of me and made sure I went to college. Like if they had not done that, I wouldn't have gone to college. And when I think back, I think what was kind of lacking, not all of my teachers were supportive. Not all of the administrators I encountered was supportive. The process that I went through just in high school, it was not designed for me to be successful. I ended up in an AP class because a teacher, a white male teacher, snatched something off of my desk and threw it in the trash can. And I was so angry, I got my backpack and I walked out the class. Well, he started chasing me, and it was a history class. And so I ran to my counselor, and I'm like, and he's still chasing me. And I run into my counselor's office, and I'm like, he's a horrible man. You have to get me out of the class. And so she, the only thing that was available was an AP history class. And what happened, it put me on an AP track. It wasn't intentional. It was accidental. So when I think about students who don't have adults to advocate for them,
yes,
it's not designed for them to be successful.
Yeah. We did, in Voiceways, we did a number of articles about and interviews about LBUSD. And one of the things, the problem, as I see it, my experience was, they do a lot of talking about how many awards they get, which is great. No one's taking away the good stuff. I think I lost you.
I'm here.
Okay. No one's taking away the good stuff. But the one thing that not just me, but other people say is, there's been this whole fight about community participation in the budget process, for instance. How do we get mothers and fathers to be advocates for their children? It's one thing when you live in a neighborhood where the PTA has $115,000 in the bank, which was in my neighborhood when our son was growing up. And then you are in other neighborhoods where both parents work, sometimes multiple jobs. It's not that they don't love their children, but they got to pay the rent. Right. They've got to put food on the table. And I just have heard horrific stories of students complaining that, I don't have access to Wi-Fi. I have to work at the kitchen table where we eat. A lot of other people are doing the same thing. So I just sometimes feel like, are we doing enough to address those, speaking of equity, issues? And is that something you've come across, that some of those things I'm talking about?
Yes. Whenever I've had the opportunity to sit at the table, at multiple tables related to education. And when I do, I'm sitting there for those families. I've had, when I made the decision to be an entrepreneur and work for myself, it was born out of wanting to be available for my kids and not wanting to have to ask permission to attend a meeting or leave early. So I know what it's like to be that parent and trying to work and still get to your children's school or whatever. So when I'm sitting at the table, I'm sitting there for that parent. And I've had an opportunity to work with families where they're struggling, where there's, 8 people in the house and they're trying to figure out how to keep food on their table. The last thing on their mind is going to a PTA meeting. That's something that's not even they're trying to figure out how they're going to feed the kids, put gas in the car, and such, and things such as that. So I don't think those things are taken in consideration, especially when meetings are being held in the middle of the day. The school board meeting is held at 5:00. When I worked downtown LA, there was no way I was going to a school board meeting. It just wasn't happening because I wasn't walking out of the office until 6:00 every day. So even for the working parent, the working privileged parent, it's even a challenge to get to school board meetings and use their voice.
I'm just even more concerned now during this COVID time. The schools are not going to open in person. And like I said, we interviewed plenty of parents and students who talked about access to technology. So if you're going to do Zoom from home, this is assuming that you've got access to Zoom or any of the online platforms. I remember there was this whole discussion about, and the Long Beach Post and Press Telegram, and a number of them did a piece about access to technology and the gap. And I just ran into people who just say, listen, the only way my children are going to have access to Wi-Fi is if they go to the library. Well, they can't go to the library. So how does that complicate moving forward? Because I'm really worried that we've got a whole generation of young people going to be falling behind.
That's been a conversation in amongst multiple organizations in the community that has kind of had to shift, I think, some of their focus to what's going on in education. At one time, they may have been active, and I think it's kind of shifting because we're discovering that the bases of people that we work with, that they are lacking, and trying to figure out how to do that. My question is, how do we know? And I really believe the only way that we're going to know is we are COVID and all, mask and all, we're going to have to actually go through our neighborhoods and connect with people. So I know I'm working with the Children's Defense Fund and in this advocacy, equity, budget conversation. And I said, hey, how can you support me and my community? I'm going to start walking my neighborhood and I'm going to start talking to parents and finding out what their needs are. Because how else are they going to be reached unless the teacher comes out of if the teacher comes to the neighborhood? Yeah. That's not realistic. I mean,
but they have a list. They have a list of the students in a classroom. Is there evidence that anybody's actually reached out to these families? I mean, I would be curious if I can't believe it hasn't happened, but I question it. I mean,
I know that when that first week after COVID, everyone's trying to figure out what was next. Yeah. My child's teacher reached out to me. Okay. And she had emailed me, and the email was going into spam. So she called me, and she says, hey, I've sent you emails. I have not heard a response from you. And I'm like, okay. So she was calling every parent, but she had small class, and she only had one set of children to be accountable for.
Yeah.
And then her classes were part-time, half-day classes anyway. So it wasn't, kindergartners.
Yeah. I'd be curious about that question, and I would love to get an answer. Let's take our last break, and when we come back, let's talk about violence. A lot of stuff going on in that area, and you can't separate that from the social justice drive and all the talk these days about the role of law enforcement in the community. So that's what we'll talk about when we get back. Let's take our last break. I'd like to talk about all those things, and I'm Antonio Ruiz. I'm speaking with Jerlene Tatum. Welcome back to PalacioMagazine.com. I'm Antonio Ruiz with Jerlene Tatum. Before the break, I mentioned that I really want to talk about, because you've had a couple of comments about this, about the issue of violence in the community. And in fact, I was just looking at your Facebook page, and this is what you posted today. So how is that violence interruption plan working out? You were commenting on an article about a 15-year-old that was not shot, yet was injured trying to run away from a shooting. And it seems like, and Long Beach is not the only one, shootings are up during this pandemic, and we can go on about why. But so I forget how many, about a month or two ago, the city council voted on, what was it? Was it really called a violence interruption plan?
Yes, it was.
And you and I chatted about this online when you were live. I mean, I remember going back to the late 90s, early 2000s, same discussion going on. There must have been how many plans? Well, by the way, there was actually a violence, what was it? Anti-violence task force.
Youth and Gang Violence Prevention Task Force.
Yeah. What do you think is going on? Are we reinventing the wheel again?
I believe we're reinventing the wheel and being reactive at the same time. The city has had a lot of plans, and I was part of the Violence Prevention Task Force, which two things came out of that. The Long Beach Gang Resistance Intervention Program, which was state funded, and the Weed and Seed Program, which was federally funded.
And this is, I'm sorry, but this is before there was another violence prevention plan, only maybe 5 years ago. So this is a Weed and Seed, right? Is that what you're talking about?
So it was So and then after that, when the funding for one was ending, the city all of a sudden was about to write another plan, and it's like, wait a minute, we're doing the work. Because I remember I went to city council and I said, we're doing the work. Have you taken a look at it? So for me, seeing what happened at city council, it was like deja vu. I'm like, wait a minute, we've been here. And so I started digging through all of my stuff and kind of hold on a paper just a little bit, but I started digging through things and finding all of these plans, and I'm not finished there yet. I'm not finished. But when I saw what happened, when that news article popped up yesterday about this shooting, I'm like, so, how is this violence interruption plan working? Which it doesn't make sense to me. And I know we're in the time of COVID, so trying to be out in the community is going to be challenging. Yeah, we're going to have to figure that out, because I think that may even be escalating the violence. And I'm sure there's a lot that's not being reported right now from it. So yet in that, for example, okay, so the conversation about defunding police. So when people see that, the first thing they say is, oh, this is why we can't defund police. Well, a police officer is not going to necessarily stop a shooting. They're not going to be like chilling out in the neighborhood like, hey, that's not going to happen.
Yeah.
Yet, if there is some type of programming in the community, or even police-based relationships, it would probably prevent the shooting from happening. They're not going to stop it once it's happening, but they can prevent it from getting to that point. But it's not just one thing. It's a collection. And that was like with the different work that came out of the Youth and Gang Violence Prevention Task Force. It was a collection of organizations and agencies that had all types of missions. And we came together and we shared what each organization was doing. And although no one was, again, standing there saying, stop, go put the gun away, maybe they were providing childcare.
Yeah.
Maybe they provided an after-school program. Maybe they were providing workforce development opportunities.
And I don't even know how we're going to deal with that. I mean, I remember, oh my gosh, I'm blanking out on what it was called, but there was a summer program. This is recently.
Summer Night Lights?
Yes, thank you. Summer Night Lights. And, I mean, there was stuff going on. And now well, because of COVID, you don't have all that stuff going on. You've got a lot of people. I think, I'm sorry to say, I think we have yet to see the consequences of COVID in terms of more homelessness, more people out of work, people resorting to, petty crimes. I just think we haven't even begun to see that. And what I worry about is, all right, we're laughing about the name violence, was it violence interruption,
Interruption.
whatever that means. Yeah, I mean, again, I'm not questioning anybody's motives here. I mean, everybody,
Right.
I believe, really wants to solve the problem. But you have so much stuff going on, like, for instance, what we just finished talking about, schools. You've got all these kids not in school with all the support systems that they have,
Yep.
that they need. Then you've got a whole other group of kids. I mean, just drive around town. I mean, it's summertime. A lot of those kids would be in summer camp.
Yep.
Yes, there's some summer camps going on, but I know a lot of people are sending their kids to summer camp. So I don't know. I don't know what the answer is, but I will tell you that I think we need folks like you and others to, like, remind us that we gotta be staying on top of this, which goes back to my last question, which is about accountability, because you're really good at pointing out, how do we remind people, like, wait a second, we don't need another violence prevention plan. We already have 15 of them. LBUSD, you can't talk about equity and then not practice it. How do we, in the time of COVID, make government more accountable?
I think part of it just begins with being informed. A lot of people, and maybe it's my gift, maybe it's my curse, of being, I take the time, I read, I look up information, I verify information. And I find that a lot of people, they just kind of take things at face value. And then after the fact, they're like, how did that happen? I'm like, oh, you voted for that. Don't you remember? It's because they got the pretty glossy campaign memorabilia, bill, and it looked good. So they voted yes when they should have voted no.
Yeah.
So what I'm doing, because I've been questioned, people are like, well, what are you doing that? I've been told that I need to be careful, that I'm endangering myself, that, if you want to be able to have people support you in this city, you shouldn't do those things. But I'm like, all I'm doing is informing people. I try to reserve some of my opinion and keep that to myself for private conversations. Yet it's like, hey, did you know this is going on? And what's happening, people are either reaching out to me or via phone call, text message, messenger, and they want more information. So what I do, I direct them in the place. And then what's so great, because we're in this virtual environment, is when I see someone who's never been engaged before, name pop up. And I'm like, okay, well, I did what I was supposed to do. That person is here now. So now that person has to take on a level of responsibility and share it with their neighbors, share it with their family members. And I really believe that that's what everyone needs to be doing. And I think now that we are, COVID, there's a whole bunch of stuff that, like I said, is yet to be seen. But I do think that people are hungry for information. And so for those of us like you and other people who have influence or have the capacity to share information, it's our job. It's our job. And so I'm constantly reading, and it's exhausting. And I do, a lot of times I check in with other people too. I check in and people send me information. You need to read this. You need to compare this. You need to talk to so-and-so. And so I'm not solo.
I think moving forward, COVID is really, for folks like yourself and other advocates, is a challenge, but I think it's an opportunity.
Yes, it is. I agree that it's an opportunity that for us to be better. I think it's an opportunity for us to be better as a society. I mean, if you think about when 9/11 hit, there was this level of compassion that kind of rippled across the U.S. and we were connecting with people, and then time went on and we went back to business as usual.
Yeah.
I think COVID is going to make it different because the impact is different.
Yeah.
The impact is different. And I think if people who don't take this opportunity, they're missing out.
Right. Right. Well, Jerlene, thank you very much for taking the time to speak to us on PalacioMagazine.com. And keep up with that Facebook Live stuff.
Thank you for your encouragement.
We need seriously, we really need folks stepping forward. So again, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.